When I was at Amazon, we had our first $1 billion quarter at Amazon. So we were a sub 4 billion organization. But how we thought about leadership, like how we work together, how we make decisions, how we prioritize, how we think things through, those things are still the exact same way. And it's one of the reasons why I think Amazon is the most interesting company of the digital era. And it's for two reasons.
From the city of Peaky Blinders, Birmingham, England, I would like to introduce you to Paddy Dhanda.
As the world becomes more automated and the robots take over, it's imperative that we build the right human skills for the future. So pull up a chair, grab a samosa or two, and make yourself very uncomfortable. Hey John, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. Which superpower are you going to explore with me today?
Yeah, well, Paddy, first of all, great to meet you. Thank you for having me on Superpower School. So we're here today to talk about my new book, which is Big Bet Leadership. One of the resources we have for Big Bet Leadership is we have a Big Bet GPT. So I went to Big Bet GPT today and asked it, what is John Rossman's superpower? And it actually gave me something that was already on my mind because I've had several people mention it to me. So my superpower is transforming ambiguity into clarity, ensuring everyone sees the path forward clearly and confidently. And as we talk about Big Bet leadership, we'll talk about there's three critical habits that legends of making these big bets successful they have, which is differentiates them. And the very first is creating clarity. And I think that especially in complex business circumstances, that's what I specialize in, is complex turnaround and transformational situations. The person who can take all the noise and all the complexity and all the dependencies and all the risks and get at the truth and have the clarity to propose a path forward and then do that again and again is the absolute master of the room.
We're living in such a complex world at the moment with just so much going on. Our minds are being filled with so much information, data. There's all these new technological advances happening all the time. And I think as humans, we're really struggling. So to be able to do things with clarity and just get the really important stuff out there, I think is a superpower. So I'm really excited for that. And you mentioned big bet. Like, what is a big bet? Because I'm not a gambling man, but in my mind, I'm thinking, is it where I put all my money on this one option?
Yeah, it's actually the exact opposite of that. So a big bet is oftentimes in a business, they're called a digital transformation, or it's called a turnaround, or it's called an AI strategy, or it's called a growth strategy. What a big bet is a plan or an initiative that has these two attributes to it. First, it has high ambition. It has the potential for having dramatic impact for the business, right? So this isn't a trivial opportunity or trivial matter. It's like high stakes. And it also has this other attribute, which is it has lots of risks, lots of dependencies, lots of unknown unknowns, right? And so you have these two things working against this situation. It's really important, but you know that it's not trivial. It has all these complexities. And so big bet leadership is a playbook to help senior leaders manage these situations. And the whole mission is how to seek out the upside while minimizing the downside risk. Well, you fundamentally do that by testing out the essential high risk, high value hypotheses early before you commit. So the whole goal, the big bet, the big is the ambition. The bet actually becomes small because you test it out. And by the time you actually deploy lots of resources and you make commitments, you're the shark at the table. You know what the answer is going to be because you've done the hard work to de-risk it early.
As technologists, we're used to forming hypotheses, testing them out, and then I guess going back to the drawing board if things didn't quite work out. So that mindset of experimentation should be within our DNA.
Most organizations, while they say they understand that, they truly don't grasp it. And it is essential to understand that, especially on these high stakes situations, because, and my co-author, Kevin McCaffrey, says this, like, there's nothing better for your career to be associated for a successful big bet. And it's also extremely risky for your career to be associated with a failed one. And let me talk about the failure statistics on these complex initiatives for just a minute, because I want people to understand both the discussion we're having, which is what is a big bet, right? And the fact that these are perilous situations, right? So here's a few statistics. An alarming 73% of enterprises failed to derive any business value from their digital transformations, and 78% fell short of meeting their business objectives. Stat 1. Stat 2. 80 to 90% of executives say that innovation is the top priority, but only 6% are satisfied with their performance. Third one, and I've got 4. Here's the third one. A study of 1,471 IT projects revealed that while the average cost overrun is 27%, an alarming 1 in 6 experienced overruns of 200% and were delayed by 70%. And then at a macro level, we all know that the longevity of companies, the half-life of longevity is shrinking. But to really stay a top performer is an extremely hard thing to do. And there's many ways to measure this. But here's one stat. From the 1970 Fortune 500 list, which is an index of the 500 biggest companies, guess how many are still in that index today?
A handful?
Only 17%, right? From 2000, which is like yesterday, right? From the year 2000, out of that same Fortune 500, only 50% are still on that list. So you've got to recognize that in 20 more years, half of the companies or more, I would propose more, will be on that Fortune 500 list. So the disruption, the dramatic change is real. So the subtitle of the book is Your Transformation Playbook for Winning in the Hyper-Digital Era. And the preface of the book is about the hyper-digital era. And it's my forecast, it's our hypothesis, that while the past 25 years of digital transformation and digital disruption has been real and has been impactful, it will pale in comparison to the next 25 years. So we've got a wicked problem on our hands, right? On one hand, we know that it's really hard to pull off these high impact, high risk initiatives, right? What we call a big bet. But on the other hand, they're critical. They're the only way to sustain the viability of an organization. Incremental moves won't do it. So that's a hard situation, right? And it gets even worse than that. It gets worse in that they fail for lots of reasons. It's not a simple recipe to pull these things off. Like, there's lots of failure points and there's lots of little things that need to be done. So my co-author, Kevin McCaffrey, and I, we worked for, studied, and have a career of pulling off these major transformations, right? So I was an early Amazon executive. Kevin ran new business incubation at T-Mobile. I advised him for 3 years. He went on to lead a strategy organization in the Google Ads business. I was the senior innovation advisor at the Gates Foundation and at T-Mobile. So we have studied and worked for a few of these legends. The legends that we think about are Jeff Bezos, obviously of Amazon, Elon Musk of many companies, John Ledger of T-Mobile, and Satya Nadella of Microsoft. I'm fortunate. I live in the Pacific Northwest. So many of these people and companies are here. But what these 4 transformational leaders do differently than other really good operational leaders is these 3 things. The first we've already talked about, which is they create clarity. The second is they maintain velocity. And the third is they accelerate risk and value, deferring everything out until you've actually tested out the critical factors. That's the 3 things. This is a nice, crisp playbook to actually put those habits into an organization.
Oh, brilliant. I'm so looking forward to hearing about some of your experiences from some of those big name organizations you mentioned, because everyone puts Amazon on a pedestal. Whenever I talk to anyone and we're looking for a role model, Amazon is the name that often pops up. It used to be Google, but I think Google's taken a bit of a beating recently with their whole AI side of things. I think they're clawing it back now between OpenAI and their Gemini kind of language models. But tell us a bit about what it was like working for Amazon. Like, what is that experience like? What can we learn from that?
Yeah. So I was an early executive at Amazon. I was there for essentially 4 years, early 2002 through late 2005. And just to put it into context, so today Amazon is a roughly $600 billion revenue organization. When I was at Amazon, we had our first $1 billion quarter at Amazon. So we were a sub 4 billion organization. But how we thought about leadership, like how we work together, how we make decisions, how we prioritize, how we think things through, those things are still the exact same way. And it's one of the reasons why I would propose that I think Amazon is the most interesting company of the digital era. And it's for two reasons. First of all, most of these companies are essentially in one business, right? Amazon is a conglomerate organization. They're in retail, they're a marketplace, they're in logistics. They're the inventor, the creator of the cloud computing category. They're a content provider, they're a device manufacturer. Like, they are in so many different businesses. That's horribly hard to pull off. But it's because of this playbook that they have, right? That is what the second reason why I think they're the most interesting company in the world is because it's really through their leadership principles and the mechanisms, the things they do behind those leadership principles, and how they've both created this conglomerate and how they keep it nimble, how they keep it moving forward. So I wrote essentially the books on this playbook. So I wrote the first book called The Amazon Way, which is about Amazon's leadership principles. I consider that kind of a primer. It's really my story at Amazon. And that book continues to sell a crazy amount. And then the complementary book is a book called Think Like Amazon, 50 and a half ideas to become a digital leader. That's all the mechanisms of Amazon. And really, so I left in late 2005. I've had a career of helping leaders and companies pull off these high stake maneuvers, right? And so big bet leadership in some ways is everything I've learned and practiced and tested in delicately taking these concepts and practices from Amazon and tuning them for the right situation at the right company. So as I mentioned, I was a senior innovation advisor at T-Mobile for about 3 years. I worked for Kevin McCaffrey. We took a lot of the Amazon playbook, especially this concept of, well, how do you create clarity? Well, you write it out and you debate it as a team, right? So it's this memo writing process. So we took Amazon's memo writing process and we created a very, purpose-built for the mission that we had, which was new business incubation at T-Mobile, and for a team and a company that didn't have all of this background. And they had some other things that they believed in. So we had to take that into account. And so we built a kind of re-engineered version of Amazon's memo writing process. And then we reworked that again for big bet leadership, really boiling down and making it very clear and specific, like what you need to do to gain this clarity on these super hard situations that we call big bets. But that's the answer to Amazon, what it was like. It was both so much fun and it was hard, but it was hard in a way that you were empowered, right? Like I was responsible for launching and scaling the marketplace business at Amazon. Today, that's over 60% of all units shipped and sold at Amazon. And I had a very small team, but the initiative impacted everything across the organization. And it was because we created the clarity of what the seller experience was going to be like, what the customer experience was going to be like, what the operational experience was going to be like. And I was given the empowerment of like, make this happen across the organization. And so we didn't let our organizational boundaries get in the way of a really important mission. And I think that's one of the things that super clear communication and putting in place the right accountability and the right leadership team does, which are important aspects that we outline in Big Bet Leadership. Companies are built to run their existing business. They are not built to change and add to that existing business. And that's the fundamental challenge. I mentioned that stat about like, well, why is it so hard for companies to sustain advantage? It's because they optimize through incremental improvement and through operational excellence, which is super important. But they atrophy, they lose this fundamental ability to test and think big and create change. And it's that muscle set, it's that capability that has to be strengthened in an organization, or you will not take advantage of this hyper digital era. You will be a casualty of the hyper digital era. And fundamentally, I think that's the choice that senior leadership has is like, do we want to be an optimist and do the hard work to take advantage of this change that is here and is going to accelerate? Or do we just want to optimize in the short term, have a short-term perspective, kick the can down the road, let the next management team have to deal with this and not do that hard work? That's a really simple choice when you come down to it. Now, the journey of doing that is not simple, but there is a playbook for it. I think we've captured some really important, not all, but some really important and novel ways to help teams do that in Big Bet Leadership.
Wow, there's so much to unpick there, but I feel this episode might be 2 or 3 hours long if I start to delve into a lot of that.
No, we're just teasing this for the audience here. Yeah.
And I know one of the big challenges a lot of organizations have or leaders have is when they come into an organization as a brand new leader, people say, but you don't understand our culture. And culture is this word that gets branded around a lot. And I know you're quite passionate about culture as well. So what challenges can a culture pose to a leader in today's modern world?
Well, all right. If you want my true unbridled input on that and everything, is fundamentally this, which is a culture has to work for the business and for the business model and the challenges that the business has, not the other way around, right? And I think that's one of the things that really good leaders do, good change leaders, transformational leaders do, is they listen to their audience, to their culture, but they don't become captive to that culture. They figure out subtle and smart ways. Sometimes they have to be dramatic in order to get the culture to work for the challenge that the business has. That's fundamentally what gets backwards sometimes when we talk about cultures. We think that the business has to work for the culture, and people could disagree with me on this. That's okay. I don't have to be for everybody. But in the way I've seen good leaders operate, and I was a partner at a turnaround consulting firm for 12 years after Amazon. Like I've worked with leaders who have to make fast and dramatic change. They're the type of leaders you're talking about, which is they come in and it's like, oh man, we're in the yellow zone here. They listen, but then they move decisively, right? Because you have to. And it's so frustrating for me, but understandable that leaders with all of healthy companies, they don't fundamentally act with purpose to create the next business, to create durable business models, to continue to innovate, to not really understand, to grok that advantage is very short-lived and it's getting shorter. And if you don't continue to work to create new value for your customers and find new customers and new use cases, you fundamentally are going to become a commodity. It's just a question of when, right? That always happens in business, always happens in business. Well, you have to be willing to change in order to make that happen. So that's the reality of the situation. And again, as you talk about AI, and I frame it in terms of this hyper digital era, like becoming a leader who can actually both operate extremely well and understands this playbook. Some people call this kind of being ambidextrous, right? An ambidextrous leader, an ambidextrous organization. Being ambidextrous and understanding, how do I actually drive transformational change in a systematic way, not in an accidental way, but in a systematic way? Well, that's the fundamental playbook that we attempted to give our take on in Big Bet Leadership.
There's a great cartoon I remember, and the kind of boss says to people, who wants change? And everyone puts up their hands. And then he says, who wants to change? And not a single hand goes up. So it's interesting.
So I'm an engineer by background. I'm not a psychologist, but man, I wish I had taken a complementary psychology degree, because my clients, senior leaders, they have they suffer from that blindness, which is they think, well, this is about the organizational changing. And what I have to do is, no, I have to get you to change. Because if you're willing to prioritize different things, if you're willing to change not everything, but some habits specifically for this change initiative, if I can get you to not just, reluctantly go along, but to become the cheerleader, an actual leader on the work that we need to do, then we have hope, right? People follow leaders and these subtle little tunes that they play relative to how we're going along with this. And they truly believe, as you said, like everything else needs to change, not me. I'm here because I'm the senior operator. I'm experienced. Well, that's true, but it's not sufficient. Changing is a different skill set than your typical operational skills, which have gotten you into the senior leadership position.
And in your book, I believe you're a little bit critical of Agile. And that's a really interesting topic for me, because I, by day, work within the Agile education industry. So I'm really intrigued to hear some of your thoughts on why you were critical of Agile. Not to say that I disagree or agree, but I'd love to hear what they are.
It's not so much critical of Agile. It's critical of the environment, the constraints that are putting around Agile. So I will at times refer to Agile as the methodology of no accountability, right? No scope, no committed outcomes, no committed budget. We're Agile. And I have literally seen that time and time again, but it's not their fault. The fault is we are putting the wrong constraints, and we're focused that Agile mindset and the Agile practices on the wrong things. And so in Big Bet Leadership, what we do is we feed in the right things that need to be tested with the right constraints, that if you have a good Agile culture and methodology and practices, then you can deploy those in the right way. But the wrong methodology, the wrong practices, or the right methodology, the right practices put in the wrong context, that's what happens with Agile too much. So have you ever sensed that, like Agile being the methodology of no accountability?
I've seen so many anti-patterns and lots of themes. Absolutely. There's been, like just yesterday, I was with my colleagues down in London and we were trying to run a meeting, but we were just figuring it out as we went along. And someone went, "Oh, good job, we're really agile." And I was like, that's not what it is.
Yeah, it's used as an excuse to be unprepared, to not have high expectations of how we execute, right? It's used for an excuse of essentially laziness and poor practices and a lack of a sense of urgency. That is what I mean when I say Agile is the methodology of no accountability. It's exactly used in the small little moments where, like, no, we have to be better than this. That's how it's used as an excuse.
Yeah. And just to put that one to bed around planning, whenever I run training sessions, I try and explain to people that I got sick of planning in Agile because there's too much planning. You literally plan like on a time horizon of multiple years. Then you plan on a time horizon of multiple months, then weeks. You go to a release level. Then there's this kind of 2-week level of sprints. And then you plan every day as well. Like there's a daily stand-up going on, and it's just planning, replanning all the time. And I'm like, I think there's too much planning in Agile. And others will go, oh no, but we don't need to plan in Agile. So there's these two very different schools of thought.
So meeting planning and execution, big opportunity in most companies. We have a specific chapter about the high stakes meetings that take place relative to one of these big bets. And the chapter is chapter 6, and it's one of my favorite titles. It's Continue, Kill, Pivot, or Confusion. And it's about the specific executive responsibilities that have to be done in these high stakes meetings. And so we give a very deliberate kind of both mindset and checklist that is essentially all about the planning to have really good hygiene and focusing on the important things in these meetings versus focusing on the lazy and subtle things that happen in these meetings. And so that is my version of how to execute better meetings. I focus on specifically on these high stakes meetings that have to go on, but people don't have a good playbook on, well, how do I recognize that this is a high stakes meeting versus just a normal meeting? And then what has to happen in a high stakes meeting for it to execute well? And if I'm a senior leader, what are my specific responsibilities in that meeting? And that's what we try to give the readers is, hey, here's your playbook for these high stakes meetings, because there's really 3 choices you have: kill, continue, or pivot. But regrettably, what happens is the 4th one all the time, or confusion, right? Confusion comes out of these meetings. We don't create the clarity of what decision we're making and why.
So if we had to break this down in a practical example, so say you and I are in an organization and I've come up with some new bright idea and we need to have one of these high stake meetings. Could you read through, like, how would we structure that? What are some of the key components that we should think about in terms of the playbook?
So we're going to rewind just a little bit. You've got this great idea. And the first thing we're going to talk about is, like, is this truly a big bet, right? Does it truly have high potential? And does it truly have all of these risks around it? Because incremental projects are very different. They can approach a more traditional project approach, an executive leadership approach. So that's the first thing we're going to do.
I've got an example in mind, by the way, so you could maybe kick the tires on it a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. You want to do that first, or you want me to lay out the construct that we need to put in place at the beginning?
Okay, let's do the construct and then we'll go through.
Okay. So the construct, and I've already mentioned, like, you need to have a fundamental, well-described, in truth understanding of what's the problem we're trying to solve, not a vague notion of the problem or a distributed notion where everybody has a different view of the problem. No, we are going to get at the essence of the problem, because really coming up with a better solution starts with better understanding of the problem. And if this is a big opportunity, I'll guarantee you there's a complex problem behind that opportunity. And that problem is either for the user that you are trying to solve it for, and or from an organizational standpoint, there's a problem. You have to get to the problem. So we would start with one of these memos that we describe. And the memo that we described is called the What Sucks memo, right? The What Sucks memo forces us to get at the real truth of, like, well, what really sucks? And is this really a valuable problem to solve? And a hypothesis of, like, what would be the killer feature, the superpower, to put it in your framing, the superpower that we would give a user or an associate or somebody real, not this vague notion of the organization. What capability would we give somebody that would solve this problem? Well, that's a hypothesis, right? And then we would continue to flush out that hypothesis with, well, what are the 3 to 5 things that would have to be true to deliver that superpower? Well, we call that the outcome definition memo. And then the third memo is the financial outcome memo. And all too often, business cases, it's just a calculation. People view it as like, oh yeah, well, they're assumptions, but in the next meeting, we're talking about them like they're facts and everything. and we don't incorporate cost model innovation and the fundamental assumptions that we're making from a business case into our testing log. So those 3 memos are the hard work that have to be done to create the big bet vector, right? The big bet vector, a vector has 2 points on it, right? Not multiple points, 2 points. One's the problem. The second is our hypothesis for the future state. And if you have that big bet vector constructed, that's creating clarity. And you can do what with it? Well, you can start testing it. You can compare it to other versions of the initiative that you might do or other initiatives you might do. And then if you decide to proceed with that specific use case, that specific big bet vector, then you can use that across the life of it to actually do these other 2 things which you need to do, which is maintain velocity and accelerate risk and value. But if you don't start with that clarity, that's why that's the first superpower that you need to have. Well, then you're doomed in these other things. So that's what you and I would start with on your idea is, do we truly understand the problem, the what sucks, and do we have a hypothesis to the superpower? And what are the 3 to 5 things that would have to be true for that superpower to be capable? Again, those 3 to 5 things, well, that goes into your testing backlog. Those are the things that we have to test early and try as best possible to defer everything else until we have a better understanding of, is this future state, can we deliver it? And is it worthwhile? And when you understand those things, then you've de-risked your big bet.
Nice. I love that. And is there a suggested timeline for conducting that level of analysis?
Yeah, because what you're probably sensing is like, hey, it's great to have this clarity, but there's an alternate risk, right? The flip side risk is analysis paralysis, right? And so, yes, there is. And there's 2 things to make this happen. It's both time constraints, but it's also kind of team constraints. You have to have a small but committed team, and it has to be led by what's called a DRI, a directly responsible individual. Amazon has their version of a DRI, which is called a single-threaded leader. If this is truly a high potential, high impact thing, it has to have committed leadership to it. And that leader can't be an underpowered project manager. They have to be senior enough to actually have context of the entire business, know how to navigate both internal and external to the business, and they have to have sway. They have to have the ability to get things done that junior level staff have a tough time doing for lots of reasons. So typically, you want to work multiple of these bid bet vectors together because you want to have a portfolio. A portfolio helps give you contrast, right? This was what Kevin McCaffrey and I did at T-Mobile. We created a process, but we created a portfolio of potential ideas that T-Mobile could do. And so, yes, we absolutely put constraints around it. And it was typically for a portfolio of, call it 5 to 10 ideas with a small dedicated team, including some part-time participants. It was 1 to 2 months to have our initial, here's 1 to 3 big bet vectors that we think make sense to go forward in actual, whatever the next stage of testing would be. But that is moving hard in an organization of scale, especially on really complex ideas and problems.
Oh, thank you so much. And that got me thinking about some of the big scary things that organizations are probably thinking about right now. And I guess AI is that famous acronym that everybody's talking about right now. So how do you think you can apply big bet leadership within an organization that's thinking about going towards AI?
Yeah, so I think when you take a tool and apply it to situations, that's an interesting way to come up with incremental change and incremental improvements. And that's largely what's going on in AI today. It's like, oh, I've got this new superpower and it can impact these tasks that I do. And so people are applying that to this task. That's great. It's important. It's good learning. Some nice results on the right types of tasks and the right job functions and things like that. But if your mission is to create a new business line, if your mission is to fundamentally change the cost structure of an organization, if the mission is to deliver a completely new experience to a set of users, you accomplish that by starting with the problem and then working backwards. That's why Amazon's methodology is called working backwards, which is what we've reverse engineered. You start with the outcome, you start with the customer and the problem you're trying to solve and your hypothesis for the future state, and then work backwards to the challenge. Because the fundamental truth is this, which is AI is both cool and it's hard, but it is not either the coolest thing or the hardest thing when it comes to making transformational change. Everything else is, right? Everything else, getting your partners on board, getting your customers to adopt it, getting your organization to change, getting the incentive structures right, getting the communication clear and specific and direct and helpful, and keeping that in line. Those are the really hard things to do in these transformational changes. So my perspective is you've got a new tool, a new superpower that works in some cases, right? That if you only apply or a hammer looking for a nail, you're only going to find the nails that apply for that hammer. You won't find the transformational change.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much for that, John. And we're fast approaching time. So I'm going to ask you one of my favorite questions, which is, if I could give you any superpower to abolish something in the world of work, what would that be? And we're going to do a trial. It's going to be for 24 hours.
Oh, only for 25? No, I would abolish 90% of all meetings, right? Because 90% of all meetings have no substantial outcome to them, right? For all the reasons we're talking about, like you don't know, well, what question are we trying to answer in this meeting? What are the decision-making rights? Are we prepared for it? And what I would do is take that 90% of time and I would have individuals and teams do deep work. In a lot of cases, that's actually writing and these memos and then a little bit of the debating, or maybe you're a marketer and you're writing your content, or you're an operator fixing a problem, or you're a software engineer actually writing code. So what I would do is I would abolish 90% of all meetings. People would be happier. People would get more real work done, and you'd create a culture that is outwardly focused and happier because you're really solving problems versus being internally focused.
Do you know, I love that. And I hear time and time again, people talking about how much they don't enjoy meetings, because I've never heard anyone say, hey, Paddy, I love meetings. I wake up every day.
I wish I had more meetings.
Yeah.
Who's ever said, I wish I had more meetings, right?
Yeah. Like, when do we ever wake up in the morning eating our cereal and going, I can't wait to start my day because I've got 10 meetings
Exactly.
today. So why do we do them? I don't get it. Like, if we all know it, the elephant's in the room, but we still just blindly do it.
It's two reasons. A, because it's the easy thing to do fundamentally, right? And so that's a lack of discipline. And secondly, we don't have a better alternative. And what I'm here to tell you is a better alternative is to work through memos and to focus work and then conversation on those memos. So Jeff Bezos recently did a great interview with Lex Friedman, and there's about a 10-minute segment in that video where Bezos talks about why working in memos is so much better and so much harder on these, but impactful on these hard problems than working in PowerPoint, right? And just having discussions about them. And so that is the essence of harsh truth, which is you have to be willing to change the way that you work. And I've had some clients talk to me about the work I did in Big Bet Leadership. And they go, oh, what's interesting about the book and the work that you do is that it's part strategy. Like, what do we do and how should we solve it? And it's also part culture and leadership change. How do we work together to accomplish that? And it's the combination of those two things that help a company really separate themselves from competition and create a durable advantage.
Oh, brilliant. And I did listen to that episode actually, and it was gold dust. So if anyone has...
It was golden. So I do a lot of keynote speaking, and I oftentimes do a 1-minute clip from that. And I say, hey, I've pulled some strings for the audience today. I have a special guest here. And so I play that 1-minute segment because I wish I could play 10 minutes, but I can't. But I've got 1 minute that he just nails why working in Memos is, and to say it's better is an underestimate. Like it is a new superpower way of working together than PowerPoints and lazy meetings.
Could you just remind us of what it is that he does? Because there's a lot of prep involved for those meetings, right?
Oh, it's all prep. Like that's what we've been talking about. It's like you have to have more prep. So the essence of his argument is that PowerPoint is easy on the presenters. It's harder on the audience. It's harder for the audience. Versus Memos are harder on the preparer. You have to be better prepared, but it's much easier for the audience. And it helps you actually get through a whole topic and then have discussions so that you can have better decisions, better nuanced aspects of it. And so it completely changes the dynamic of these important decision-making meetings. And again, like all the work through Big Bet Leadership rides the hard work of creating that big bet vector, which is done through having these memos and decisions based off of the memos. And so that's fundamentally what Bezos is talking about, is like it forces harder thinking up front, but that it empowers senior leaders to do the most important thing they need to do, which is to make resource allocation decisions. What companies don't suffer from a lack of good ideas. They have lots of ideas. They suffer from a lack of identifying the idea and how to proceed on it, and staying committed to it and understanding that it's fundamentally an experimental journey and not a predictable journey that we're fundamentally do. That's the mission of Big Bet Leadership, is to help seize those high opportunities, make good decisions on which one and how to proceed on it so that you can proceed with ambition, but in a very safe way, right? You test out the risks before we make the big commitments to them.
And John, final question. If people want to get in touch with you and find out more about the work that you do and the great book that you've just launched, how do they do that?
Yeah, so bigbetleadership.com. You can we've got an incredible set of resources, including all the templates for these memos. We've got the Big Bet GPT that I mentioned earlier, and you can learn more about us. We've got some fun videos with both Kevin McCaffrey and myself there. And you can get a hold of me on LinkedIn. John Rossman is pretty easy, or I'm john@rossmanpartners.com.
Oh, amazing. And thank you for sending me the book as well. I think one of the sort of indirect benefits of starting this podcast is I now get a few books through the post, and it's amazing guests like yourself that share those so generously. So I do really appreciate it. And when I have had an opportunity to read it fully, I will get back to you and post about it as well. So
I'm looking forward to seeing how you think about applying some of these things into your work. That's what I'm really interested in, why I take the time and the investment to put it in the hands of professionals like yourself, because I know you'll go like, oh, not in every case, not in everything, but there's moments where I should incorporate and make it my own version of some of these things that Big Bet Leadership talks about.
Oh, brilliant. And yeah, I just want to thank you once again for spending the last 45 minutes with me. I feel like I've become a lot wiser from this conversation, certainly given me some things to think about as well. So yeah, really appreciate your time today.
Paddy, hope you have a great week.
It's the end of another episode. Thank you so much for listening. Please do connect with me via LinkedIn and drop me a message and let me know your favorite takeaways from the episode. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Superpower School newsletter so that you can be notified of all future episodes. Simply visit the website www.superpowers.school. Thank you once again.